In the bustling city of Los Angeles, Amelia Reyes, a 35-year-old widow, battles daily to support her two children, Eva and Henry, aged 10 and 12. The small, cramped apartment they live in starkly contrasts with the opulence of the mansions scattered across the hills, such as the one owned by Richard Campbell, a 45-year-old billionaire and heir to a vast technology and investment empire. Amelia's days are filled with the mundane and exhausting tasks of motherhood, her heart heavy with the weight of loss and the struggle to keep hope alive for her children. She dreams not of luxury, but of stability and security, yearning for a future where her children can play freely without the fear of going hungry. The vibrant streets of Los Angeles, often filled with laughter and the promise of opportunity, are, for her, a harsh reminder of what lies beyond her reach. On a particularly gloomy afternoon, with the sun hidden behind thick clouds, Amelia finds herself facing the harsh reality of an empty refrigerator. Desperation gnaws at her as she decides to search a nearby dump for anything that might offer a glimmer of hope, something to sell, something to reuse. As she rummages through the trash, something shiny catches her eye. It's a luxurious carpet, carelessly discarded among the debris. She hesitates but carefully unrolls the carpet, her heart racing with anticipation. What she discovers leaves her breathless, a thick envelope stuffed with cash. For Amelia, the sight of that money is both a beacon of hope and a source of fear. Could this fortune be the answer to her prayers, or is it a Pandora's box that could bring calamity upon her family? The enormity of her discovery weighs heavily on her conscience. Torn between the urgency of seizing this chance for a better life and the fear of the unknown, she chooses to seek advice from someone she trusts. Derek Phillips, a local police officer known for his kindness to the neighborhood residents. As night falls, she heads to Derek's house, clutching the envelope tightly. She recounts the harrowing story of her discovery, and he listens attentively, promising to investigate the origins of the money without involving her name until he can determine its legitimacy. However, upon returning home, Amelia's heart races when she finds a threatening note pinned to her door. Forget what you saw. Fear for her children consumes her. Someone knows about the money, and the danger is closer than she imagined. Meanwhile, Richard Campbell lives in a world far removed from Amelia's struggles. Surrounded by opulence, he grapples with the suffocating expectations of his billionaire lifestyle. Despite the luxury that envelops him, he feels a profound emptiness. The carpet he had discarded without a second thought was deemed tainted. Unbeknownst to him, it held the key to a nefarious scheme that would intertwine their lives in ways neither could foresee. As Derek uncovers more about the origins of the carpet, he traces its connection to one of Richard's companies and attempts to confront the billionaire. However, his questions are met with indifference. Richard is too absorbed in high-stakes meetings to concern himself with the trivialities of a local officer's inquiries. As Amelia lives under the growing shadow of threat, she begins to notice a black car following her. A mysterious figure in dark sunglasses haunts her neighborhood, and whispers of danger ripple through the community. Tension escalates when, arriving home one day, she finds her apartment ransacked with a clear message left behind. Don't make things harder. Panic grips her children as they question their safety, and Amelia's heart breaks at the thought of them living in fear. The realization that the danger may not only come from strangers, but possibly from within the very system meant to protect her deepens her dread. As the investigation progresses, the stakes rise. The threats escalate, and the danger becomes all too real when Amelia's children are nearly kidnapped. Derek's timely intervention saves them, but the message is clear. The organization behind the fraud is willing to go to any lengths to silence them. With time running out and the walls closing in, Amelia, Richard, and Derek must join forces to expose the corruption threatening to destroy them all. They race against the clock, knowing each step could bring them closer to freedom or deeper into peril. Amelia stood in her tiny kitchen, staring at the empty refrigerator, her heart sinking deeper with each passing moment. The weight of her circumstances pressed heavily on her shoulders, and as she glanced at her children playing in the other room, laughter ringing out amidst their meager surroundings, she felt a pang of guilt. The toys, scattered across the floor, were a stark reminder of her late husband, whose absence rendered every joyful moment bittersweet. That day, she had planned to take Eva and Henry to the local park, their small escape from the concrete jungle that surrounded them. But now, with no food to sustain them, she felt the urgency of her situation. The park would have to wait. Instead, she ventured out into the grimy streets, desperate to find something, anything, that could help fill their fridge, even if only temporarily. As she walked, memories of their past life flitted through her mind. Her husband's laughter, the family dinners they had shared, and the dreams they once had felt like distant echoes. Each step toward the nearby dump felt heavier, but she pushed on, her determination fueled by the need to provide for her children. The dump was a chaotic mess of discarded dreams and broken promises. As she sifted through the debris, she felt the rawness of her vulnerability, an emotion she had masked for so long. But in the midst of the clutter, the luxurious carpet caught her eye, and for a moment, hope flickered. Rolling it out, her heart raced as she found the envelope stuffed with cash. Yet that exhilaration was quickly overshadowed by the weight of responsibility. What would she do with this money? Could she trust it? Could she trust herself? The questions raced through her mind, and with them came the reminder of the dangers that lurked in the shadows of her reality. It was a mixture of elation and fear, a reminder of how quickly a moment of luck could turn into a nightmare. That night, after confiding in Derek, the police officer she had come to trust, Amelia returned home, her heart pounding. The threatening note left on her door made her stomach churn. She had wanted to believe that the world still held goodness, but now she felt the chilling touch of danger. The following days were filled with small, daunting challenges that chipped away at her resolve. A brief encounter at the grocery store turned into an embarrassing ordeal when she realized her card had been declined in front of a long line of impatient shoppers. The shame made her cheeks burn, but she forced a smile as she turned to leave, dismissing the judgmental glances. The kids noticed her discomfort and tried to lift her spirits, but their innocent attempts only deepened her sense of failure. Her heart twisted when Eva asked if they could have pancakes for dinner. Amelia had no flour, no eggs, and certainly no syrup. Instead, she offered a half-hearted promise of pasta, hoping it would suffice, but the disappointment in Eva's eyes cut her deeply. In the days that followed, Amelia began to find solace in the small community around her. She met Mrs. Ramirez, an elderly neighbor with a penchant for baking, who offered her pies in exchange for help with her garden. The warmth of their blossoming friendship provided a flicker of light in Amelia's otherwise dark days. They shared stories, laughter, and tears, building an alliance that made the burdens more bearable. However, amid these connections, the looming threat remained. The black car that had once trailed her now parked ominously outside her apartment building, a constant reminder of the danger that lurked just beyond her door. The whispers of the neighborhood grew louder, and fear seeped into everyday conversations. One evening, as Amelia and the kids huddled on the couch, a knock on the door startled them. It was Derek again, his face etched with concern. He'd learned more about the money and the people involved, and his warning sent chills down Amelia's spine. The weight of the situation grew heavier, and she felt the need to act, to push back against the fear that had settled over her home. Her resolve began to harden. She could no longer remain passive in the face of these threats. Inspired by her children's unwavering spirit, she decided to confront the challenges head-on. The first step was to talk to Mrs. Ramirez about starting a small neighborhood group to keep an eye on each other, fostering a sense of community that might deter any looming danger. It was a small act, but it felt monumental. a shift from mere survival to taking control of her life. Meanwhile, Richard's world was unraveling in its own way. He faced the pressures of his empire, grappling with whispered accusations in the boardrooms that echoed through the halls of power. The carpet, the one Amelia had discovered, was now a symbol of a dark underbelly he was beginning to uncover. The more he learned, the more he realized that his wealth had come at a cost, one he had been blissfully ignorant of until now. As the lives of Amelia and Richard began to intertwine, the small challenges they faced together, like navigating the realities of their circumstances and forming unexpected alliances, set the stage for the greater conflicts that lay ahead. Each obstacle, each moment of vulnerability, was a step toward their eventual confrontation with the realities of ambition, greed, and the lengths one would go to protect those they love. In a city where dreams were often built on the backs of the desperate, Amelia's journey had just begun. Her heart, now tempered by the trials she faced, marked the start of a transformation that would ripple through the lives of those around her, leaving an indelible mark on a world that often overlooked the quiet strength of a mother's love. Amelia felt a knot tighten in her stomach as she stood in front of the mirror, her reflection a haunting reminder of the weariness that had begun to etch itself into her features. The bags under her eyes spoke of sleepless nights filled with worry and dread, and the smile that once came easily now felt like a mask she had to force on. She was a mother, a protector, but the weight of her responsibilities had begun to smother her spirit. Days turned into weeks as she navigated her new reality, and the threats lurking outside her door transformed from shadows into palpable fears. The black car remained a constant presence, a silent predator watching her every move. Each time she stepped outside, she felt the penetrating gaze of its occupants, their intentions shrouded in mystery but dripping with menace. It was a reminder of the money she had found and the dangerous web it had woven around her life. Determined not to let fear dictate her actions, Amelia began to take small steps toward reclaiming her life. She organized a neighborhood meeting with Mrs. Ramirez, gathering a handful of families in her cramped living room. As they exchanged ideas and stories, Amelia felt a flicker of hope ignite within her. The camaraderie that formed among the group became a lifeline, a shared understanding of their struggles in a world that often overlooked them. Yet, the challenges did not cease. One evening, as Amelia prepared dinner, a loud bang echoed from the hallway, jolting her from her thoughts. She rushed to the door, heart racing, to find a broken window and a note scrawled on the ground. "We know what you have." Panic surged through her veins. The safety she had tried to build for her children felt like a house of cards, ready to collapse with the slightest breath. Derek arrived shortly after, his brow furrowed with concern. He examined the scene and pulled Amelia aside, his voice low and urgent. "You need to be careful, Amelia. This isn't just about the money. It's bigger than that. You're involved in something dangerous." His warning hung heavy in the air, and Amelia's heart sank as she realized the truth in his words. The weight of his statement crashed down on her, pushing her back into a spiral of doubt. What had she gotten herself into? Could she keep her children safe? The flickering light of hope began to wane as fear seeped back in, threatening to swallow her whole. As days passed, the neighborhood watch group thrived, but so did the undercurrents of tension. Amelia struggled with the responsibility of leadership, feeling ill-equipped to guide others while grappling with her own turmoil. The weight of their expectations pressed down on her, and she began to question her ability to protect not just her children, but her newfound allies as well. Mrs. Ramirez became a steady presence, offering wisdom born from years of experience. "We must stand together, Amelia. You're not alone in this," she would say, her gentle voice a balm to Amelia's frayed nerves. But even as she found strength in their alliance, the gnawing fear of the unknown persisted. Would her efforts be enough to shield them from the impending threat? The emotional toll of her situation began to seep into her days. Every laugh from her children felt tainted by the shadows lurking outside. Eva, ever perceptive, began to pick up on her mother's unease. "Mum, can we go to the park tomorrow?" she would ask, her eyes wide with innocence. Each request twisted Amelia's heart, a reminder of the life they once had and the carefree moments that felt so distant now. Amidst the chaos, Richard's world continued to unravel. The carpet that had once symbolized luxury now represented a dark truth that clawed at his conscience. As the whispers of corruption grew louder, he found himself at a crossroads. The power he had wielded so effortlessly now felt like a heavy chain, binding him to choices he never wished to confront. Driven by guilt and a sense of responsibility, Richard began to reach out to those affected by the very dealings he had turned a blind eye to. His intention to make amends propelled him into the depths of the city's underbelly, where he encountered people like Amelia, those struggling against forces far greater than themselves. As their paths drew closer, the divide between their worlds began to blur. Amelia's struggles mirrored Richard's own, and the weight of their respective burdens intertwined in a way neither could have anticipated. But the moment of connection came with its own set of challenges. Amelia's resolve to protect her children clashed with Richard's burgeoning desire to confront the darkness he had been complicit in. Could they unite their strengths to face the threats encroaching on their lives, or would their differences drive them apart in the end? As Amelia wrestled with her fears, she found herself at a crossroads. The emotional toll of her circumstances had begun to shape her into a woman of resilience, but at what cost? Each setback pushed her to confront her deepest insecurities, forcing her to question her beliefs about herself as a mother and as a fighter. In quiet moments, she would reflect on the dreams she had buried deep within her, visions of a stable home, laughter echoing through the halls, and the simple joy of pancakes on a Sunday morning. But now those dreams felt like fragile whispers, barely audible over the cacophony of her reality. The challenges Amelia faced were not just external, they were a battle within herself. The line between survival and surrender blurred, and in that ambiguity she began to discover the true essence of her strength. With each obstacle, every moment of doubt, her spirit was slowly being forged, tempered by the fires of adversity. As the stakes grew higher, the threads of their lives began to intertwine in ways that would test their fortitude and redefine their understanding of courage. Amelia's journey was one of transformation, an evolution from a mother overwhelmed by circumstance to a fierce protector willing to face the darkness for the sake of her children and perhaps for the sake of herself. The storm was gathering, but Amelia was ready to stand firm, even in the face of fear. Amelia's newfound resolve was soon thrust into a tempest of challenges that tested her at every turn. The broken window and the ominous note had been just the beginning. Days later, while she was at the grocery store, she noticed a familiar black car idling in the parking lot, its windows tinted and its occupants obscured. Her heart raced as she hurried her children through the aisles, each moment stretching into eternity as the sinister presence loomed nearby. It was no longer just a background threat. It felt like a spotlight illuminating the fragility of their situation. The anxiety that gripped Amelia began to manifest physically. She found herself losing weight, her appetite dwindling, and sleepless nights compounded by haunting dreams of being chased through dark streets. The emotional toll of constant vigilance bore down on her, and her patience wore thin. She snapped at her children over trivial matters, the guilt of which gnawed at her even as she tried to maintain the facade of normalcy. Meanwhile, the neighborhood watch group was becoming a double-edged sword. While it provided a sense of community, it also amplified the stakes. One evening, during a meeting, Mrs. Ramirez shared distressing news. "There are whispers about a gang in the area," she said, her voice low but urgent. "They're targeting families like ours, looking for any weakness." The words reverberated in Amelia's mind, hammering home the relentless danger that lurked just beyond their doors. As Amelia felt the walls closing in, Richard's journey took an unexpected turn. Emboldened by his guilt and the desire for redemption, he began to dig deeper into the corruption that had ensnared him. He attended meetings with those who had suffered due to the decisions he had once turned a blind eye to. Each encounter chipped away at his former self, revealing the man he truly wanted to be, yet the shadows of his past loomed large. Richard discovered that many of the families he had disregarded were intricately linked to the very money that had initially entangled Amelia. It was a revelation that both terrified and motivated him. He had a chance to make things right, but it would require confronting powerful adversaries. As the two worlds began to converge, Amelia faced an internal battle. She had always believed in the strength of community and the power of collective action, yet now she questioned whether they were equipped to face the threats closing in. The more she learned about Richard's past, the more conflicted she became. He was a man who had lived in the shadows of greed, and she struggled to reconcile the man seeking redemption with the one who had contributed to their fears. The tension reached a breaking point when Amelia discovered a message on her porch one morning. Another note, this one written in a jagged scrawl. "You can't hide from us, we will find you." The stark threat sent her spiraling into despair. She felt as if she was standing on the precipice of a cliff, the churning waters of fear and helplessness below. In the midst of this turmoil, Richard sought Amelia out, desperate to bridge the chasm that had formed between them. "I can help you," he insisted, urgency in his voice, as he stood on her doorstep, the raw determination in his eyes sparking something inside her. "I know people who can protect you, who can help us fight back." But Amelia was reluctant. The memories of his past weighed heavily on her heart, and she feared that aligning with him could jeopardize everything she had fought to build. As her children played in the background, their laughter a bittersweet reminder of what was at stake, Amelia felt a flicker of hope amid the chaos. Perhaps Richard's knowledge of the underbelly of their city could offer a lifeline, but the more she considered it, the more she felt the pressure of her community's expectations. Could she trust him? Was it wise to link arms with someone who had once turned his back on the very people he now sought to protect? The crossroads she faced began to seep into her dreams, where shadows morphed into figures and the stakes grew ever higher. Each night, she found herself battling the manifestations of her fears, wrestling with the idea of surrendering to despair or rising up to reclaim her narrative. The struggles of motherhood, coupled with the weight of her community's hopes, bore down on her spirit. With each passing day, the distance between her and Richard seemed to shrink, even as the danger loomed larger. He shared stories of the injustices he had witnessed, of families devastated by the very systems that had once elevated him. His honesty cut through her defenses, and she began to see the man behind the mistakes. But trust was not so easily won. The scars of betrayal ran deep. In a moment of vulnerability, Amelia confided in Mrs. Ramirez about her hesitations. "What if I'm wrong to let him in? What if he's just using us to absolve his guilt?" Mrs. Ramirez listened intently, her wisdom and experience evident. "Sometimes, Amelia, we must take risks to forge a better path. You have the strength to lead, but you don't have to do it alone. He may be the ally you need." As the storm clouds gathered, Amelia felt the weight of her choices bearing down on her. She was at a juncture where she could either continue to fight her battles in isolation or embrace the possibility of collaboration, even if it was fraught with uncertainty. The emotional turmoil churned within her, each heartbeat echoing with the realization that the journey ahead would demand courage in ways she had not yet grasped. In the face of escalating threats and the gnawing fear of betrayal, Amelia understood that the time for decisions had come. She could feel the tides shifting beneath her feet, the winds of change stirring as the fabric of her life began to unravel and weave anew. With the stakes growing ever higher, one truth emerged. She would either sink into fear or rise to meet the challenge head-on, and in doing so, perhaps find the strength she had always sought within herself. The night air was thick with tension as Amelia lay awake, her mind racing with the implications of her choices. The shadows in her room seemed to whisper, taunting her with the uncertainty that had become a constant in her life. Just as she began to drift into a restless sleep, a loud crash shattered the stillness, a sound that turned her blood cold. Heart pounding, she jumped out of bed, her instincts screaming danger. Rushing to the window, she saw the familiar black car parked across the street, its headlights suddenly illuminating the driveway. A figure emerged, cloaked in darkness, moving with a purpose that sent a jolt of fear through her. The realization hit her like a wave. This was no longer an abstract threat. It was real, and it was here. In that moment, a primal instinct took over. Amelia grabbed her phone and dialed Richard, her hands trembling as she pressed the device to her ear. "I need you," she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. The urgency in her tone sliced through the fog of uncertainty that had clouded her mind for days. Richard arrived within minutes, his face a mask of determination as he surveyed the scene. "We need to get the kids," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos. As he moved through her home, Amelia watched the man she had only begun to understand transform into someone fierce and protective. The sight filled her with conflicting emotions, fear, hope, and a flicker of admiration. As they gathered the children, whispers of doubt crept back into Amelia's mind. What if this was just another trap? But the urgency of the moment pushed those thoughts aside. They couldn't stay here. They had to act now. Richard led them out the back door, his presence grounding her as they navigated the familiar terrain of their neighborhood, now a labyrinth of uncertainty. When they reached Richard's car, Amelia felt an overwhelming wave of relief wash over her. The sense of safety that came with being beside him, however tentative, was a balm for her frayed nerves. As they drove away, she stole a glance at her children, who were oblivious to the gravity of the situation, their innocent chatter filling the silence. In that fleeting moment she realized how much was at stake, not just her own safety, but the very essence of her family. The revelation struck her hard. Amelia had been so focused on the shadows of her past and the fear of betrayal that she had lost sight of what truly mattered. The love for her children and the fight for their future overshadowed her doubts about Richard. She had spent too long wrestling with her fears and not enough time considering the possibilities that lay ahead. As they drove into the night, a newfound determination ignited within her. She had always believed in the strength of community, and now, perhaps more than ever, she would need to lean on that belief. Richard's willingness to fight back against the very forces that had threatened her family offered a glimpse of hope. A chance to reclaim her narrative, to turn the tide against the shadows that sought to consume them. In the days that followed, Amelia found herself shifting her perspective. She began to see Richard not as a man burdened by his past mistakes, but as a potential ally in her fight. The community watch group that had once felt like a burden now became a tool, a means to rally support and reclaim the safety of their neighborhood. The whispers of gang presence turned into a rallying cry, and Amelia took it upon herself to lead the charge. The emotional toll of the previous weeks began to dissipate, replaced by a sense of purpose that fueled her actions. She started organizing meetings, bringing families together to share their stories and devise a plan. The fear that had once paralyzed her transformed into a fierce resolve, igniting a fire within her that she had never known existed. As she stood before her neighbors, sharing her vision for a safer community, Amelia felt the weight of her choices solidifying. The bond she had formed with Richard became a linchpin in her strategy, and together they began to forge a path through the darkness. The initial doubts that had plagued her mind were replaced with a sense of clarity. Trust was a choice, and she chose to believe in the possibility of redemption, both for Richard and herself. But as the stakes grew higher and the threat loomed larger, Amelia knew that the real test was yet to come. The confrontation with the darkness that had infiltrated her life was inevitable, and the path ahead would demand every ounce of bravery she could muster. The journey had transformed her, and now, standing at the precipice of a new beginning, she was ready to embrace the challenge with open arms. The climax approached, and with it, the promise of resolution. Amelia understood that this was not just about survival. It was about reclaiming her life and the future she envisioned for her children. As they faced the unknown together, she felt the stirrings of hope, a beacon guiding her through the storm. The time had come to rise, to fight back, and to illuminate the shadows that had threatened to engulf her. In the days following the pivotal moment that had thrust Amelia and her family into chaos, the immediate consequences began to ripple through her life like the aftershocks of a quake. The resolve she had discovered in herself transformed her once passive approach to the threats lurking in the shadows into an active stance of defiance. Each morning, she rose with a purpose, her heart steady with the knowledge that she was no longer just a victim of circumstance. She was a mother, determined to protect her children and reclaim her life from the darkness that had infiltrated it. Amelia's emotional landscape shifted dramatically. The fear that had previously clouded her thoughts gave way to a fierce determination. Organizing community meetings became her new normal, and with each gathering, she felt the weight of her responsibilities grow heavier, yet more empowering. The faces of her neighbors, once strangers, now reflected a shared urgency for safety and justice. As they connected over their fears and hopes, Amelia found not only solidarity, but also a renewed sense of belonging. She was no longer isolated in her struggles. She was part of a collective movement. Yet even as she thrived in this newfound role, she grappled with the enormity of her mission. The stakes were higher than ever, and the pressure to succeed loomed large. But with every opportunity came new obstacles. As Amelia rallied her neighbors, she sensed the resistance brewing among those who preferred the status quo. Whispers of dissent circulated in hushed tones. There were those who believed any attempt to confront the gang presence would only provoke further violence, and the fear of retaliation hung in the air like a storm cloud. Amelia felt that tension as she stood before her community, her voice unwavering but her heart racing. The fear of failure gnawed at her, a persistent reminder that their safety hinged on her ability to unite them against a common enemy. Richard, too, faced challenges in his own transformation. The man, who had once seemed defined by his past mistakes, now found himself in a position of leadership alongside Amelia. While he offered strength and strategic insight, the shadows of his past lingered, casting doubt on his ability to truly protect her and the children. Amelia noted the moments when his confidence faltered, the flicker of insecurity in his eyes that betrayed his worries about being worthy of their trust. She understood that their bond was fragile, and as the pressure mounted, the potential for strain loomed as well. As the days turned to weeks, the emotional toll began to manifest in both Amelia and Richard. Amelia frequently caught herself lingering over her children's laughter, a bittersweet reminder of what was at stake. Each joyful moment was tinged with the anxiety of the unknown, and she found herself torn between the desire to shield them from the growing dangers and the necessity of involving them in the fight for their safety. At night, when the house fell silent, she would lie awake, wrestling with her thoughts, wondering if she was doing enough or if she was leading them into deeper peril. Richard, in contrast, began to channel his past experiences into action. He took on a more proactive role in the community meetings, sharing insights from his own history that resonated with others. His vulnerability forged deeper connections with those around him, revealing a man willing to confront his demons for the sake of those he cared about. Yet Amelia could see the toll it took, the weariness etched on his face, the moments when he seemed lost in thought, burdened by the weight of his choices. The challenges of their circumstances tested their bond, bringing them closer, but also forcing them to confront the fractures in their trust. In the midst of this turmoil, the specter of confrontation loomed ever larger. Amelia felt the urgency of the approaching climax pressing upon her. The community meetings had sparked a fire, but she knew that without decisive action, that fire could easily extinguish. Whispers of a potential confrontation with the gang began to circulate, and with them came a palpable tension. Amelia understood that they were at a precipice. The next steps they took could either bring them closer to safety or plunge them deeper into danger. In her heart, she felt a flicker of hope. This was not merely a struggle for survival, it was a fight for agency, for the right to live without fear. The momentum they had built offered glimpses of possibility, a community standing united against the shadows that had once divided them. As she prepared to address her neighbors once more, Amelia sensed a change in herself. She was no longer just a woman reacting to threats. She was a leader, driven by love and resilience. Yet, as she stood before the crowd, ready to galvanize support, a knot of anxiety tightened in her stomach. The challenges ahead were daunting, and the thought of failing those who had placed their trust in her weighed heavily on her shoulders. But in that moment, she also felt the strength of the community behind her, a testament to the power of solidarity. The tension in the air crackled with potential as Amelia prepared to speak. She understood that the stakes were higher than ever, and the confrontation with the shadows was inevitable. Her journey had transformed her from a woman paralyzed by fear into a fierce warrior ready to reclaim her narrative. As she stepped forward, she felt a surge of determination, ready to face whatever came next. The climax was approaching, and Amelia was prepared to rise to the challenge, fueled by the love for her children and the hope for a brighter future. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the streets, Amelia stood at the center of the gathering, her heart racing with a mix of adrenaline and dread. The community had arrived, their faces illuminated by the flickering light of makeshift torches, a sea of anxious expressions reflecting the gravity of the moment. Tonight was not just another meeting, it was a reckoning. The whispers of confrontation had solidified into a plan, and Amelia was about to face the very threat that had turned their lives upside down. The gang's presence had been a malignant shadow over their community for too long. Reports of escalating violence and intimidation had reached a boiling point, and Amelia knew their time for action had come. With Richard by her side, she felt a flicker of confidence. He had transformed into a pillar of strength, lending his voice to the call for change. But uncertainty loomed large. What if their efforts were met with violence? What if their determination only provoked the beast they sought to drive away? Taking a deep breath, Amelia stepped forward, her voice steady despite the chaos swirling in her mind. We stand here tonight not just as individuals, but as a community united by a common purpose. We will not allow fear to dictate our lives any longer. We will confront this darkness together. Her words ignited a spark among the crowd, their murmurs of agreement swelling into a chorus of determination. As the meeting progressed, the tension in the air thickened. The plan was to confront the gang members directly, to reclaim their streets and their sense of safety. But the fear of retaliation clung to them like a shroud, and Amelia could feel the weight of their doubt pressing down on her. Would they truly follow her lead into the unknown? Then came the moment that would define everything. As she finished outlining their strategy, a commotion erupted at the edge of the gathered crowd. A group of gang members had arrived, the very embodiment of the terror that had haunted them. Their faces were hardened, eyes glinting with menace as they approached, a palpable tension crackling in the air. The community's resolve faltered for a heartbeat. Fear swept through them like a cold wind. Richard stepped forward, his body tense, a protective stance that spoke volumes. "Stay back," he shouted, his voice cutting through the rising panic. We're not afraid of you anymore." The words hung in the air, a challenge that echoed in Amelia's heart. This was the confrontation they had prepared for, yet the reality of it struck like a blow. Amelia felt a surge of adrenaline. She could not let fear win. Not now. "You may think you hold power over us," she called out, her voice rising above the clamor, "but you are wrong. We are not your victims. We are a community, and we will fight for our right to live in peace." Her declaration was met with a mixture of surprise and resentment from the gang, but the strength of her conviction seemed to ripple through the gathered crowd. The gang leader, a tall figure draped in darkness, stepped forward, a sinister smile playing on his lips. "You think you can take back what's mine? This is my territory. I'll show you what happens when you stand against me." The threats dripped with malice, and the air thickened with the tension of impending violence. Amelia's heart raced, but she held her ground. This was the moment she had been preparing for, the culmination of her journey from fear to empowerment. She turned to the crowd, their eyes wide with uncertainty, and saw Richard's fierce determination mirrored in the faces of her neighbors. They had come together, united by their shared pain, and now it was time to channel that unity into strength. "Remember why we are here," she urged, her voice steady and strong. "We are here for our children, for our families, for each other. We will not be driven away from our homes. If we stand together, they cannot break us." Her words ignited a fire within the crowd, and they began to chant, a powerful wave of defiance that surged toward the gang. As the chant grew louder, the gang members shifted uneasily. It was a sight Amelia had once only dreamed of, a community no longer cowering in fear, but rising in solidarity. The gang leader's expression darkened, his bravado faltering as he realized the tide was turning. But he wasn't ready to back down. With a swift motion, he lunged toward Amelia, a flash of rage in his eyes. Time slowed as she saw the threat approaching, and in that instant, she felt the weight of her journey. All the fear, the doubt, the moments of uncertainty, she had faced them all to get to this point. Amelia instinctively stepped to the side, feeling the wind of his movement brush past her. It was an act of survival, but also a moment of clarity. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every person standing behind her, every life they fought for. Richard surged forward, intercepting the gang leader, and the two engaged in a struggle that sent shockwaves through the crowd. Amelia's heart pounded as she saw the chaos unfold, but she refused to let fear take hold. She rallied her neighbors, urging them to stay together. "We are stronger than they are. We cannot let them divide us." Her voice rang out, igniting their collective spirit. The crowd surged forward, emboldened by her words. They stepped into the fray, standing shoulder to shoulder, a human wall against the encroaching threat. The gang members, once confident in their intimidation, now found themselves outnumbered, surrounded by a community that refused to back down. In that moment of chaos, Amelia felt a profound shift within herself. She had transformed from a woman plagued by fear into a beacon of hope and strength. The gang's hold on her life was slipping away, replaced by the realization that she was not alone. Together, they were a force to be reckoned with. As the struggle continued, the gang members began to retreat, realizing they were no longer the predators they had once been. The crowd's courage had shattered the illusion of their power. In that moment, Amelia understood the true nature of resilience. It was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to confront it head-on. With the gang finally dispersing, cheers erupted among the crowd. Amelia's heart swelled with pride and relief. They had faced their greatest challenge and emerged victorious, not just as individuals, but as a unified community. The battle had been fought, and they had reclaimed their streets, but more importantly, they had reclaimed their sense of agency. As Amelia looked around at the faces of her neighbors, she realized that this was just the beginning. They had forged bonds of trust and resilience that would carry them forward. In the aftermath of confrontation, they found solace in each other, a renewed commitment to building a safer, more hopeful future. In that moment, she knew they had not only faced their fears, but had ignited a movement that would resonate beyond the boundaries of their community. They had turned their pain into purpose, and in doing so, they had transformed from victims into warriors of their own destiny. In the aftermath of the confrontation, the atmosphere in the community was electric, with a mix of triumph and disbelief. Amelia stood at the forefront, the energy of the crowd coursing through her veins like wildfire. The gang had scattered, their bravado extinguished by the overwhelming unity that had emerged from the shadows of fear. The streets, once echoing with intimidation, now resonated with shouts of victory and the promise of a new beginning. As the crowd began to disperse, Amelia felt an overwhelming sense of relief wash over her. She had confronted the darkness and emerged not just unscathed, but transformed. She was no longer the woman who had trembled in fear at the sight of the gang. She was now a leader, a symbol of resilience for her community. The weight of her journey pressed upon her, each step toward this moment, a testament to her courage and determination. Richard approached her, his eyes gleaming with pride. "You were incredible, Amelia. You inspired everyone," he said, a warmth radiating from his words. She could see the change in him too. He had stepped up in ways that she could have only hoped for. The bond they had forged during this tumultuous time was unbreakable, built on trust and shared purpose. Amelia took a moment to reflect on the journey that had brought her here. It hadn't just been a fight against the gang. It had been a struggle to reclaim her own sense of agency. She had learned that bravery wasn't the absence of fear, but the determination to act despite it. The sacrifices made by her neighbors, time, energy, and even safety, had created a foundation that would support their community going forward. In the days that followed, the community began to heal. Meetings were held regularly to discuss how to maintain their newfound strength. They established neighborhood watch programs, created safe spaces for their children, and began to foster connections with local law enforcement. The gang's grip on the area had weakened, but they understood that vigilance was key to ensuring peace. Amelia made it a point to reach out to those who had been directly affected by the violence, checking in with families who had lived in fear for so long. Each conversation brought its own revelations and reaffirmed her belief in the power of solidarity. She realized that the fight against fear and oppression was not just about confronting the gang. It was about standing together, supporting one another, and healing as a community. The bonds forged during that fateful night extended beyond the immediate threats. Neighbors who had once been strangers became allies, forming friendships that would last long after the echoes of their victory faded. Amelia saw families gathering for potlucks, children playing freely in the streets, and laughter filling the air, an almost foreign sound that had been silenced for too long. As she navigated this new chapter, Amelia found herself reflecting on the lessons learned from her journey. She had faced her fears and emerged stronger, but she also understood the importance of humility and listening. She resolved to remain open to the voices of her community, ensuring that their collective vision would guide their path forward. The transformation was palpable, not only in her own life, but in the lives of those around her. Richard had taken on a leadership role within the neighborhood watch, and Amelia often found herself collaborating with him, strategizing on how to further strengthen their community. Their friendship deepened, rooted in their shared commitment to fostering a safe environment for everyone. As they strolled through the revitalized streets one evening, Richard turned to her, a smile playing on his lips. "You know, I never thought I could be part of something like this. You brought us all together, Amelia. You made us believe we could stand up for ourselves." His words resonated deeply. She had not only empowered herself, but had ignited a flame within others, urging them to reclaim their power. Amelia's reflections also included thoughts of those who had stood with her during the confrontation. She remembered the faces of her neighbors, the fear that had transformed into determination. She realized that every voice counted, every story mattered, and she was committed to ensuring that no one felt alone again. In the coming months, the community organized events to celebrate their resilience, bringing in speakers to share their stories of courage and hope. They invited local leaders to participate, fostering connections that would help them secure resources for ongoing support. Amelia took pride in helping to create a mural that depicted their journey, a vibrant testament to their struggles and triumphs. As the sun set over the neighborhood, casting a warm glow on the faces of her friends and neighbors, Amelia felt a sense of fulfillment. She had helped to create a new narrative, one where fear no longer dictated their lives. Together, they had transformed their pain into purpose, turning their community into a sanctuary of hope. The journey was far from over, but they had taken the first steps toward a brighter future. Amelia stood tall among her neighbors, knowing that they would continue to face challenges, but they would do so together. They had forged an unbreakable bond, a testament to the strength of community and the power of collective action. In that moment, as laughter echoed through the streets and the scent of barbecues wafted through the air, Amelia realized that they had not only reclaimed their territory, they had also reclaimed their lives. And with that realization came a profound sense of peace and purpose, a promise to keep fighting, not just for themselves, but for every future generation that would call this place home. As the community continued to flourish in the wake of their collective victory, Amelia could feel the palpable change in her surroundings. The streets, once cloaked in fear, had transformed into a tapestry of resilience and hope. Children ran freely, their laughter echoing as they played in the park, a park that had once been a no-go zone. Local businesses began to flourish again, as people felt empowered to step outside and reclaim their spaces. Amelia's actions had sown the seeds of change, and they were beginning to bear fruit. Amelia watched as her neighbors, who had once been shadows of their former selves, began to emerge with renewed vigor. She recalled the timid voices that had once hesitated to speak up, now echoing with confidence in community meetings. Each story shared, each idea proposed, was a testament to the progress they had made together. Richard, her steadfast ally, had become a beacon of hope, rallying others to join their efforts. His leadership in the neighborhood watch had turned into a passion, and his charisma inspired many to take up roles in their community's safety initiatives. The community gatherings had become a melting pot of ideas and plans for the future. Amelia knew that she was not just a part of this transition. She was at its heart, guiding it with her vision and determination. The mural they had created together, an intricate depiction of their struggles and triumphs, became a symbol of their unity and strength. It served as a constant reminder of what they had accomplished and what lay ahead. As the weeks turned into months, Amelia took the time to reach out to those who had once been hesitant, those who had felt powerless against the tide of fear. Many had found their voices, and the bonds between them grew stronger. She organized workshops that focused on conflict resolution and self-advocacy, empowering her neighbors to become agents of change in their own right. The air was thick with possibility, and Amelia's heart swelled with pride. One evening, while sitting on her porch, Amelia reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She remembered the fear that had once paralyzed her. It was a distant memory now, replaced by a sense of purpose that propelled her forward. She had faced her demons, not only in the form of the gang, but also in the deep-seated insecurities that had once plagued her. She had learned that true courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to rise above it. Her heart swelled with gratitude for every person who had stood by her side, for every voice that had joined hers in a chorus of resistance. Yet there were still challenges ahead. Amelia knew that the gang's influence could resurface. They would not simply fade away. However, she felt a sense of calm, knowing that her community was no longer the silent victims of intimidation. They were united, ready to confront any adversities together. The lessons learned during their fight had equipped them with the tools necessary to face future challenges head-on. As she prepared for another community meeting, Amelia felt the familiar flutter of nerves in her stomach. But this time, it was paired with excitement. She was no longer merely a participant, she was a leader, and her voice mattered. She had learned the importance of listening, of elevating the voices of others, and she was determined to foster an inclusive environment where everyone felt valued. The meeting was a tapestry of emotions, hope, determination, and a hint of anxiety. Amelia could sense the undercurrents of unresolved issues among some members. Old wounds still lingered, and she knew that complete healing would take time. But she was committed to facilitating those conversations, to ensure that no one felt alone in their struggles. Together, they would confront the past, learn from it, and build a future forged in understanding and compassion. As the night deepened, Amelia realized that their journey was not just about eradicating fear, it was about creating a legacy of strength for future generations. She envisioned a community where children would grow up feeling safe and empowered, where they would learn the values of solidarity and resilience. They were planting the seeds of change, and it was a beautiful sight to behold. In the quiet moments before the meeting began, Amelia closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She felt a sense of peace wash over her, a recognition of how far they had come and the promise of what lay ahead. Her heart was full of hope, but she was also aware that the road ahead would require vigilance, commitment, and ongoing support from every member of their community. As the meeting commenced, Amelia looked around the room, meeting the eyes of her neighbors, each one a testament to the power of collective action. They were no longer just individuals, they were a family, bound by shared experiences and aspirations. And as they discussed their plans for the future, she felt an unwavering conviction in her heart. They would face whatever came next together. The journey had transformed her, and it had transformed them all. Amelia knew that while the gang's threats might not be entirely behind them, they were prepared to confront those challenges with courage and unity. The community had become a sanctuary of hope, and together they would continue to forge a path toward a brighter future, one anchored in resilience, solidarity, and love. This was just the beginning, and Amelia was ready to embrace it all. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm golden glow across the town, Nathan stood at the edge of the familiar cliff that had been a constant in his tumultuous journey. The waves crashed against the rocks beneath him, a rhythmic reminder of the storms he had weathered in the past months. Each surge of the ocean seemed to echo the struggles he had faced, each drop of water a tear shed in moments of despair. Yet here he was, not defeated, but transformed. Reflecting on the choices that had led him to this moment, Nathan felt a deep sense of clarity wash over him. He had once been a man trapped in a cycle of self-doubt and fear, allowing the expectations of others to dictate the course of his life. The loss of his job, the end of his long-term relationship, and the betrayal of a close friend had all felt like insurmountable obstacles. At times he thought he might never rise from the depths of his despair. But now, as he gazed into the horizon, he understood that these setbacks had been catalysts for change, rather than the end of his story. His journey had not been solitary. He had found support in unexpected places. The kindness of strangers, the unwavering love of his family, and the encouragement from newfound friends had all played a crucial role in his transformation. Nathan had learned the power of vulnerability, opening up about his fears and dreams, and in doing so, he had forged connections that were deeper and more meaningful than he had ever known. Those relationships became the bedrock of his newfound strength, proving that no one has to navigate their struggles alone. In the months that followed, Nathan embraced unexpected opportunities. He took up painting, a passion he had shelved in the name of practicality. Each stroke of the brush was a release, a way to translate his emotions onto canvas. His art became a silent dialogue with the world, a testament to his journey from darkness to light. Through this creative outlet, he discovered not just a talent, but a profound sense of purpose. The colors he splashed across the canvas began to reflect the vibrant life he was forging for himself. As he stood there on the cliff, Nathan felt the weight of his past lift. He had set aside the notion that he needed to conform to the expectations imposed by society, or even those he had placed upon himself. Instead, he chose to live authentically, to pursue the dreams that ignited a fire within him. The cliff was not just a place of reflection. It was a symbol of the leap he was willing to take into the unknown, embracing whatever came next with open arms. The path forward, while still uncertain, was filled with possibilities. Nathan had learned to welcome uncertainty, recognizing it as an intrinsic part of life. He understood that challenges would persist, but he was no longer the man who had been paralyzed by fear. He felt equipped to navigate the ups and downs, armed with resilience and a newfound sense of self-worth. Each challenge was an invitation to grow, to learn, and to adapt. In this moment of clarity, Nathan also realized that his journey was not just about personal victory, it was about legacy. He had found ways to give back to his community, mentoring young artists who struggled with their own insecurities. He shared his story openly, inspiring others to embrace their vulnerabilities and pursue their passions. Nathan's experiences had illuminated a path for others, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, hope could bloom. As the sky darkened, Nathan took a deep breath, inhaling the salty sea air. He felt a profound sense of gratitude for the journey that had shaped him. His heart swelled with a mix of emotions: joy for the victories, sorrow for the losses, and appreciation for the lessons learned. He was not the same man who had stood at this cliff months ago. He was stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. The conclusion of Nathan's story was not merely an ending, but a beginning, an acknowledgement that life would continue to unfold in unexpected ways. He had embraced the idea that it was okay to stumble, to fall, and to rise again. With each new day, he would carry forward the lessons learned, the connections made, and the dreams reignited. As he turned away from the edge, Nathan felt a renewed sense of purpose wash over him. He had emerged from the shadows into a life brimming with potential. The journey had transformed him, and now he stood ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead with courage and hope. In that moment, he understood the essence of resilience. It is not about never falling, but about rising every time you do. And as he walked away from the cliff, he carried with him a powerful message that he hoped others would embrace. Life is a tapestry woven with both light and dark threads, and it is in the interplay of those threads that we find our true strength. Each of us has the power to redefine our narrative, to turn pain into purpose, and to inspire others along the way. In the embrace of uncertainty, there lies the potential for growth, for joy, and for a future that is brighter than we could ever imagine.